I am the mother of Dan Eldon. He was an ordinary guy, annoying, sock drawer, messy, chauvinistic, just like a piglet. Ordinary person. This is not a superhero, okay? He's not Batman, Superman, or anything. He's an ordinary kid with what I would say is an extraordinary view of the world. He was born in London in 1970. When he was 7, we moved to Nairobi, Kenya, and I was a journalist there. I didn't know anything about journalism. Dan followed me wherever I went and engaged in actually taking a lot of photographs for the newspaper. But I was so lucky then because I was telling stories about people who were nation building. This was early days in Kenya. And they didn't ask permission to do stuff. They didn't get permits for doing things or licenses often. They just rolled up sleeves and made things happen. They were creative and they were active people. And Dan watched of this kind of activity. He created his own solutions to challenges. When he was about 14, a friend of his was dying of a heart disease. He started Operation Save a Heart and raised the money with his friends for the heart operation for this girl. When he was about 15, he adopted a family. There was a family of Maasai, beautiful family outside of Nairobi. And the mama had about 7 children, a useless husband, and Dan bought her jewelry from the mother, this is one of the pieces, and sold it, and then gave all the money back to the Maasai mother. In gratitude, he became really like her son. She called him Lisharo, which means the laughing one, and Kippenget was his Maasai mama. This is a picture of him being initiated into the Maasai tribe. This is when he was we start here when he was really about 8 years old. That was his first photograph of a Maasai right there. You can see how his art sort of expanded and became more exciting. You can, in this picture, he's really using watercolor and tempera and his fingers to bring the images alive. I always point this one out because he was obsessed by ostriches because he thought they were the stupid-looking animals on Earth. So he did a whole series on ostriches. He did a sort of big number on his baby sister, this Amy, who was 4 years younger than him. And he, you see that the third eye and then the buffalo here. For him, the symbol of evil was a buffalo because when he was 16, he was chased by a buffalo, which are the most dangerous creatures in Africa. And if you have a minute to read this, it's a very vivid description of his being chased by a buffalo. I love this particular one. It's a collage that he did of his friend's pet. This is a pet cheetah. He says here it's foolish and hazardous not to dance in Africa. And I think what he means there, it's, you just have to be fully engaged. Even though you're embarrassed and you can't really dance, you just have to get out there and go for it. This is a very happy period of his life. He said in general, life is good. In specific, it's excellent. But he traveled with his sister to Morocco, and this is an image in almost like a witch doctor. I can't remember what they were called. It wasn't a witch doctor, but it was all the sort of potions that were created out of like rhino horn and other unmentionable stuff. I love this particular image. One day I want to make a children's story about those elephants. And the actual picture is only that big. It's on my wall. When he was 19 years old, he had traveled the year before in a Land Rover named Desiree, his Land Rover over there, down to Malawi with a couple of friends. And they had ended up at a refugee camp where there were about 14,000 very totally impoverished people. They didn't have any water supplies. They had absolutely nothing. They were refugees from a terrible civil war in Malawi and Mozambique. So he gathered together this load of friends, including a character named Chris Nolan. Now, are there any film students here that might know the name Chris Nolan? What did Chris Nolan direct, please?
Batman and Inception.
Brilliant. Okay, absolutely. And Memento, and absolutely. So Chris Nolan was a 19-year-old, 18-year-old student who came along as the photographer, filmmaker. He's now the biggest director virtually in the world. Other people on the safari, they were transformed. They went across the 3 countries in Africa, including totally war-torn Malawi. And when they arrived at the refugee camp and discovered all these people with absolutely nothing, yet they were very happy and they were grateful for whatever they had. And it shifted everybody's perception really on life. And Chris became a filmmaker, Ellie Tatum is now the bureau chief for the biggest African-American newspaper in the country. Jeff Gettleman, who's in here, Jeff is now the bureau chief for the New York Times. It's crazy what happened to these kids, but they were just like you guys. Out of this, Dan created a mission statement for himself. And what is a mission statement? Well, here's Dan's. Team Desiree, named after the safari. Free at last voyages, the search for clean water in a swamp. Energy, sincerity, clarity of vision, creativity. Mission statement for safari is a way of life. To explore the unknown and the familiar, distant and near, and to record in detail, with the eyes of a child, any beauty of the flesh or otherwise, horror, irony, traces of utopia or hell. Now, if you read in the margins, it's not quite so highfalutin. Some of it I can't even read aloud in a school, but you'll have to go and read this. Okay? What happened on the safari is that Dan and Lengai, his best friend, fell in love with Marta. So she was the agony and ultimately the remedy, but he didn't have that remedy because she went off with Lengai. It was very painful. This period of his life, he was 20 years old. He was living in all over the world, actually. When he was graduated from high school, I thought, right, okay, he's visited the colleges, he'll go off to college. And he said, Mom, I really don't want to go to college right now. I want to do something else. And I said, oh, you want to take a year off, do you? And he said, no, Mom, I want to take a year on. It's much harder to learn actively. Like, I want to learn Spanish in Mexico. I want to learn how to, microeconomics by haggling in a souk in Casablanca. And I thought, okay. But he had figured out ways to raise the money that he needed to be able to go on this year on. And he ended up as an intern at Mademoiselle magazine in New York. When he was 21, and he'd been to 4 colleges by then, and he went to college because he was dyslexic. He figured he could never actually graduate, with math scores were so terrible. So he would go to a college and he would learn what he needed to learn. Like if he needed to learn Japanese, he would go and take Japanese courses or economics courses or whatever it was, and then he would go out and use his experiences in the world, or use what he learned in the world. So when he was 21, he was about ready to head back to UCLA for another college adventure. And he heard about a terrible famine in Somalia. He grew up in Kenya, which if you think of Africa, it's right here on the bulge. Somalia is the country above Kenya. He went in with his camera, very happy kid, and discovered these scenes of unspeakable horror, of famine, of deprivation, of real tragedy. He took pictures which were among the first to go around the world, and they awakened the world, and they launched something called Operation Restore Hope. Marines came in, and basically the food came in, and they were saved for a little period. The situation went terribly wrong, and ended up in a terrible civil war. As you know, Dan became the kind of storyteller for this horrific situation. His work appeared in the center spread of Newsweek and Time magazine, was all over the world, but it had he paid a price for it. If you look at this picture and you look at this picture, you can see the aging in 1 year of this young man. What he was seeing, the poverty, the pain, the individual stories. He told a story once about arriving in a hospital and seeing the bodies of a woman and child, and they'd been shot by a single bullet. There was another scene of a naked body of a young girl being washed, and he said, there's so many things, they're so horrific, I can't photograph them, but I don't know where to put them in my mind. He said, I know I'm changing, things are happening to me. And he was really, really frightened by it. He did manage to get through that period, and I think it was one of the most triumphant periods of his life. He was just about ready to go off, tackle something new. We weren't sure what it was going to be, but it was his last trip into Kenya. And unfortunately, as you know, there was that terrible bombing, and the survivors ran to get the journalists, and when they arrived, the people were so enraged that they beat and stoned the journalists to death. What sort of consoles me at some point is this statement that he made. This is a journal page. Death is just a horizon, and the horizon is only the extent of your view. And to find that written on one of the margins, I found extremely hopeful. Todd will remember, it's better to go somewhere than not to go somewhere. So if you're lying around and you think, oh, stuff it, I'm just going to watch TV or, play a violent video game or whatever you people do. Get up, dust yourself off, go somewhere, do something, engage, be alive. Make the plan work. Figure out a plan for your life. Figure out your mission statement and make it work. Don't just say, oh, stuff it, again, life is too hard or there are too many obstacles. Rubbish, you can do it. Look for solutions, not problems. Make things happen. Become a creative activist. You already are. You all have a creative spark within you that can be used not only for yourself but for the world around you. We say it's a person who uses thought or imagination to catalyze positive change in our world. We at our foundation, which we created in Dan's name to celebrate the concept of creative activism, we have 80 projects and productions now done by grassroots people like you. The film Happy was done by Rocco Bellic, who was one of the people on the Dan Safari. And in his film Happy, he looks at what makes a happy person. And was it the next Land Rover definitely, Mercedes? What was it, more money? What is it? And he found that the essence of happiness around the world is, you got to have enough so that you're covered, But it's really about engagement in community. It's about creativity. It's about a sense of purpose. It's about giving back to others and having fun along the way. That's what the essence of happiness is.